How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.
Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, June the 24th. Another big Blair-era political figure is about to re-enter our politics. James Purnell, Minister under Mr Tony, Cabinet Minister under Gordon Brown, is set to be made Andy Burnham's Chief of Staff. In the last 24 hours, I've talked to so many people that say they were sworn to secrecy about the appointment. It turned out not to be a very good secret after all. Last night, representatives of the business and finance world told me that the appointment would be a major reassurance about the Burnham government to them. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Purnell is a close friend of Andy Burnham, first a special advisor in Downing Street back in 1997 when Tony Blair walked through the door of number 10. He was a pensions minister, later a culture secretary too under Gordon Brown, and then work and pensions secretary before a kamikaze resignation in 2009 designed to unseat Brown. Well, that failed, but Purnell's just one of those Blairites who never entirely leaves the Labour stage, however many jobs they may have in between, and he's had a few. And I've known him, Sam, through this panoply of different existences. But number 10 just seems to be the place they all want to head back to. Will it work out better this time than it did for his old school friend, Tim Allen? He was, in fact, Tim Allen's best man, the outgone head of communications for Keir Starmer.
Oh, that's interesting. After leaving Parliament, he moved to the BBC to oversee strategy, and he was director of radio. And then he ran the University of Arts London before his most recent job running the major business advisory firm called Flint Global. And we discussed a couple of weeks ago whether he might be in line for this job. And at that point, Anne, I was kind of the view, I was being led to the view that bluntly, he earned so much money and had such a large sort of slice of the equity of the pie of Flint Global, which is one of the bigger, more successful advisory firms, that he wasn't going to give up possibly millions in order to take this job. But it seems that he is about to take one hell of a pay cut in order to enter number 10.
It does speak to the fact, doesn't it, that you just cannot take that drive to give it one more go. Try and make a Labour government work. And it's telling that the most senior figures around Andy Burnham, like those running his by-election campaign, have been MPs. He hasn't known them for that long, or they've attached themselves to his Manchester project. But now we're seeing a different side of Burnham. And I was kind of, in a way, quite gratified to see this appointment of James Purnell, because I had a sort of instinct that Andy Burnham would reach back, but I wasn't sure that he would do this. He could say he'd moved on, that people don't want to see the Blair crowd anymore. But I think there is just something that binds those people. That Burnham was always, I think, was a slightly thinner brew of Blairism than, say, James Purnell, Tim Allen, and others. But they do all in some way hang out together. They see a lot of each other. And I think they even played together football in the New Labour demonised team back in the day. So there's going to be a lot of those old references. But how is it going to be leveraged for the problems that Andy Burnham has now?
Well, in one sense, it does start to answer the question of whether or not Andy Burnham will just represent one wing of the Labour Party or a sort of slightly broader church. I know labels like Blairite, the ones that you've just used, are sort of a little bit unhelpful these days, but they remain kind of deep in the psyche of the Labour Party, and so we do still sort of reach for them. And while we're on the subject of labels, in a remarkable piece of serendipity and a great piece of journalism, James Purnell actually appeared on camera last night to talk about Andy Burnham. It was in a piece by Gary Gibbon of Channel 4 News. And it's a fabulous watch, this film. But he was asked about Andy Burnham's politics. And he said that he thought that Andy Burnham, this is James Purnell speaking, he thought that Andy Burnham was a Blanketite. Who's, of course, the hard as nails former Labour Home Secretary. So that's the image that James Purnell thinks should be projected by Andy Burnham. Rather hilariously, Gary then cuts to an interview that he does with David Blunkett, who says, no, he's not. But that's, I think, rather by the by, but it's all well worth a watch.
That's a very David Blunkett thing to do. And I think you are right, Sam, to maybe remind us to put aside some of the isms and ites for a second at least, because I would see Purnell as one of a posse of midlife Labour elites who hail from the Blair to Brown years, have had their differences about jobs they had and who they served, but they see themselves really as deliverers. And what they think is that the party's gone off track in over-focusing on listening to its own playlist, if you like, all the stuff about you. Here are my values. When you understand how great my values are, you'll vote for me. And I just remember one of their number saying to me, there is always this delta that you have to deal with in the Labour Party about people who will come to it because you say the right things for what they want it to be, for their values. And you have the others who would say, can you just get elected and we can get things done? And I think one of the things that Burnham will have to do is try to pull that delta closer together, because I think that's what's gone a bit wrong inter alia. The other thing I would say, I mean, just having seen these chief of staff roles, which he seems to be nailed on for down the years, going back those near 30 years, is it had changed quite a lot. If you look at Morgan McSweeney, he was more like a consigliere, a campaigner, an arch strategist. And I think Purnell will go back and do it a slightly different way. And it was more in the way that it was done under Blair, but obviously modernised for whatever is needed now. And that's driver and facilitator of big policy wins. That's where his work in pensions background, which is quite deep, and I guess still deep interest in, will come into gear. Let's remind ourselves he's been pretty radical over the years. I think he felt his job as pensions secretary, work in pensions, was unfinished. It sort of fell out with the Gordon Brown vision by 2009. He then went on to author a pamphlet around 2011. And went on TV talking about it, calling for cuts to winter fuel allowances. Oops, I doubt he's going to be doing that one. Thought you could pay for lots of changes in the welfare system by getting rid of some free bus passes and TV licenses. So, he was in that zone of, I called them the Labradors, sort of Labour-Tory hybrids who were looking for things to reform and how to do it. But, quite painful to the Labour backbench view of what should happen. Quite interesting. Has he mellowed in the meantime? Let's see.
We will find out. What's interesting, Anne, I think at the moment is actually, I think inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, there's a pretty widespread recognition that they've got completely on the wrong side of the welfare debate. It's now routinely an attack from the Tories and for reform. And I think after the Alan Milburn report about young people and worklessness, there's a desire to move quite quickly on that once Andy Burnham is installed. There is just a big, bold kind of settlement that could be offered by an incoming Prime Minister prepared to use some of his political capital to do traditionally difficult stuff for, on the Labour side, something that Keir Starmer was just abjectly unable to do after last year's welfare defeat. So I think, I do think this business of the welfare background of James Purnell is important, not because he'll be taking the decisions, but because he understands how it works and he's able to navigate it, and he'll have some sense of both the technical aspects of it and what represents a landmine in Labour circles. So that's so I am putting at the top of my watch list for an Andy Burnham government big stuff on welfare. Interesting fact sent to me last night by a Labour figure once the name of Purnell emerged. Andy Burnham and James Purnell were the very first chair and vice chair of the newly established all-parliamentary party group for private equity and venture capital when they were new MPs. So that's one of the reasons. They're not kind of particularly authoritative, weighty groups, but it is a signal to the business and finance community about the kind of things that they understand and appreciate, which again is not completely the sort of soft left cliche that you get from some castings of Andy Burnham.
You would expect, though, that there's going to have to be some balance in this system, isn't there, for Andy Burnham and for those who've backed him up to this point, more from the soft left wing of Labour, to be happy, because this is, we're giving a fairly, sort of good welcome here to James Purnell coming back. But I think a lot of people will have some concern, Sam, about what this means for the welfare debate in Labour. How is it going to be reframed? The signs are that his old friend Pat McFadden, who's in post, of course, at least for now, as welfare secretary, that there's big change coming. I think you're absolutely right about that. And how far can they go to shake off the failures that really dogged Keir Starmer once he couldn't get those reforms to the benefits system through? There's a side, of the Purnell argument, which I think over the years moved much more towards the fact that the system that we have in the UK, it's just very easy to end up with a ratchet effect of benefits and people relying more on benefits than going to work just because the incentives are poorly aligned. And he got very interested at one point in this Bismarckian European contributory, so early to say that, system where the public feels a greater connection between what it pays into the system and what it gets in return. It's more of an insurance idea. Now, that's never really flown in the UK. That would be a massive reform. Personally, I doubt that there's even time to do that, because this looks like a 2 to 2.5 year roll up to the next election. But we will see, I think, quite an interesting constellation there. Who are they going to work with as Chancellor?
Right, zombie government latest. We now know that Darren Jones, pretty much as everyone expected, isn't going to stand for the leadership. Claims he was never going to stand for the leadership. But Al Kearns is still mulling it, still hinting, still showing a little bit of flesh. But I, again, can't see him getting the numbers, so I think that's all a flight of fantasy. At midday, we see the artist formerly known as Keir Starmer for the first time since his tearful farewell. Yesterday, a note went round from Cabinet Secretary Antonio Romeo saying that there's no major government announcement until the new Prime Minister is in place. But there's one big exception, which is on a lot of the front pages this morning, the Defence Investment Plan released before the NATO summit still. Now, a lot of people, Anne, are suggesting this is the source of a big row between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer. But do you know what? I'm just not sure. I can't see any quotes to that effect in the papers. And the logic to me just isn't quite there. Right. As emerged yesterday, Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham are actually having meetings. And Starmer has opened the door of Whitehall to Andy Burnham, saying that he should get access talks to the civil service in the sort of interregnum. So, of course, Andy Burnham can come back later and top up the defence investment plan. But it cannot be the case that Andy Burnham would relish Donald Trump going at Keir Starmer at the NATO summit in a couple of weeks' time. That is not in Britain's national interest. So is he really opposed to something coming out before then? I'm just a bit sceptical. And this fact of everybody playing nicely behind the scenes suggests to me, and the lack of quotes suggesting a row, of course they can come and change some of the sums later on. But I just wonder whether it's quite as tense as I read. I think the fact that every other announcement has been paused, it tells you that the government isn't trying to be difficult to the incoming Andy Burnham administration.
And according to Playbook, Burnham's told allies he wants to go beyond Starmer's £13.5 billion settlement to that proposed settlement sum that caused the walkout of the Defence Secretary, John Healey, and that John Healey has been sounded out and to find a way to get the uplift towards meeting the Russia threat. I mean, one thing I think for sure you are I'm pretty sure, right, that there hasn't been as much of a bust-up as was perhaps being suggested between Starmer and Burnham. But I think Burnham knows full well, just also in terms of his positioning, as well as what may be the right thing to do, that he has to be seen to be really implacable on the Russia threat, and that if he doesn't, he will be seen to have landed. There is an attack line already on Burnham that he's not very well prepared for this job. And if he comes in looking like he's at all wobbly on this big national security matter and how to fund the defence, I think that could go very badly for him. So the final funding for the Defence Investment Plan, the DIP, does not appear to have been settled. So says my colleague Mason Boycott-Owen, who follows a lot of these defence things. And he goes on to say that Dan Jarvis, as the new Defence Secretary, is still leaning on the Treasury to get a bigger settlement. Personally, I don't see the Treasury being able to resist this, because when you look at what happened last time, there was a stalemate and the entire government imploded. So the precedent here is somehow to find, as you say, something you can work with now, probably look to bolt on more spending once Andy Burnham gets into place, gets all his fiscal advice about maybe where he could flex and where he could take a different view of those ironclad rules that strangled Rachel Reeves.
Right, a little bit of a handbrake tie, other parties are all trying to work out how to deal with Andy Burnham. None more important than kind of Reform UK, because I think a lot of MPs think that Andy Burnham's arrival heralds a, more robust approach to reform. You sat down with Robert Jenrick yesterday and you got him to talk about Andy Burnham. Let's listen to that.
You need to have someone coming in with a very clear idea of how are we going to actually fix the country, a set of serious, well thought through plans to do that, and go and put that to the people. That's what reform stands for. And it feels to me as if Andy Burnham is just trying to cruise in to number 10 without any idea what he's going to do. I couldn't tell you, perhaps you can, and what he's planning to do. It sounds to me as if it's just going to end up being continuity Keir Starmer, that you're going to end up with in Andy Burnham. He's basically Keir Starmer in a dodgy polo shirt, and he stands for exactly the same kind of politics.
What's dodgy about his polo shirt?
Well, look, it's just vibes, isn't it? It's basically the same politics that has failed this country for more than just 2 years, for a very long time, dressed up in a slightly more human way.
Yes, Robert Jenrick, floor crosser, Treasury spokesman, shadow chancellor, at least as Reform would like to see it. Interesting to hear what he thought, Sam, about how to approach the early Burnham years. So he went off on the line, as we've heard, about a continuity. Keir Starmer mocked the new Makerfield MP's dress down style, saying he's basically Keir Starmer in a dodgy polo shirt. We, then had a discussion about what was dodgy about a polo shirt. Ironically, I then got into the lift with Robert Jenrick in Reform HQ, and 3 guys got in all wearing polo shirts, and the silence descended in the elevator. The line is to call for an election. We had a long riff on that. That's unsurprising if you're the challenger party. But maybe what stuck with me was that Jenrick was badging Andy Burnham not so much as a big soft lefty threat, but just more Drear Keir. The knockabout had a purpose, I think, which was to say we've had a lot of failures. He acknowledged a lot of failures since Brexit while he defended Brexit, but it was very much along the lines of now is time to do the radical thing. Wait 2 more years or so with this guy in the polo shirt. It's not going to make any difference. Move rightwards, do the radical thing. It'd be quite interesting if that remains the line that Reform runs on in the Burnham era.
So one of the really fascinating things about Reform at the moment is the kind of spats that we've had between Jenrick and Zia Youssef, and they were sort of around just how tough to be on migration policy. We know they want to abolish indefinite leave to remain, only admit high-skilled people on visas, and you got into the territory of the fact that they will not allow people to get, the sort of visas, the rare visas that they'll sprinkle a few of for high-skilled people if you're in social housing. And the question was always just how much Robert Jenrick would lean into the very toughest of policy positions, such as deportation, including deportation of families with children. And that's what you got into with him. This is 90 seconds of your exchange with him. It's quite something.
You can't say in all good conscience that a British military veteran or a British victim of domestic abuse should be living on the streets or in precarious temporary accommodation, and then there's somebody who's a more recent arrival to the UK who's not a British citizen who gets that housing.
But they have been given leave to remain. They would have, in many cases, children with them. How do you see, you seem to me as a reasonable person, how would you feel about deportations, how that was supposed to happen and what that would require in terms of basically the use of pretty much of some form of state coercion for that to happen?
Well, if you have no legal right to be in the UK, then you have to leave, don't you? But I suspect the vast majority of the people will leave voluntarily. People are reasonable people. They'll realise that they no longer have a right to remain in the UK, and they'll choose to leave of their own accord. But if you're asking me, will there also be the need for some people to be deported? Yes, absolutely, and that happens in every other country in the world. It's a curious mindset that we've got ourselves in this country, where we seem to be prioritising the interests of people who are not British citizens over those of our own country.
So to be clear, you would have people who were living in council-owned or social housing who would have children, some of whom would have been born here, who would be deported.
Well, if their parents have no right to be in the country, then yes, that's logical, isn't it? Are you saying that that people who are illegal migrants should just be allowed to stay? Well, children
also have claims to citizenship, don't they?
Well, I don't think there's no reason why people who are not British citizens who do not meet our economic test should be allowed to stay in the UK.
Yeah, it was a bit of a tussle by the end, because I was just trying to get some clarity on it. But what I took from it, I don't know if you read it the same way, Sam, I did think he bent quite a lot towards the Zia Yusuf position over who would potentially be on the block for reform deportations if indefinite leave to remain is abolished, and the party is pledging to do that. And what I was pushing him on, and this was obviously for people in council or social housing, was that is pretty hard to deliver, whether one thinks it's a good idea or morally acceptable or not. But what happens if you've got a UK-born partner with UK citizenship? Your children are also UK citizens. What would happen then? And I think he then did a bit of a segue into saying, oh, well, people will get the message and they will either get private sector accommodation and we should free up council social housing for native Brits who need it most. That was quite a signal. But he wasn't giving ground on that. He said deportations were fully okay. He's not at all scared of the D word. And I think what we're going to see is quite a line there between reform and restore, who would probably go even further and faster, and the other parties on what that would look like. But reform will have to fill out some of that. If this is what they want, how you go about it, how you enforce it, well, that's still going to be a huge talking point. You can listen to that interview, by the way, in a special edition of the Politico podcast, Westminster Insider. It's in your feeds now with lots of other bits of Robert Jenrick's thinking, including his plans for a deregulatory big bang. If they win power, that would be a huge overhaul of financial regulation. So our finance peeps, my colleagues who understand this in great detail, are picking that up today as well.
Right, there'll be a big bang if we keep talking, because we've bust over the 20 minutes. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see how Keir Starmer fares at PMQs and bring the latest to you tomorrow morning. See you then.
Yes, I deregulated the timings there a bit this morning.
How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.